Sergeant Stuart Green, a lean 130-pound infantryman with the 1st Battalion 28th Infantry, sat down to rest in the dense jungle undergrowth of the Hobo Woods 2 days into Operation Crimp. The temperature hovered at 95 degrees. The humidity made breathing feel like drowning on dry land. Green shifted his weight, and a sharp pain shot through his backside. He jumped up, cursing. What he thought was a nail protruding from the jungle floor was actually something far more sinister. A trap door. One of hundreds, one of thousands. The opening to an underground world that would redefine modern warfare and create one of the most feared units America would ever deploy in combat. What Green didn't know, what nobody knew on that sweltering January afternoon, was that beneath his boots lay over 150 miles of interconnected tunnels. An entire subterranean universe capable of housing 5,000 enemy soldiers. A maze of darkness that had taken 20 years to construct, one handful of clay at a time. And in the coming months, small men with big courage will volunteer to crawl into that darkness, armed with nothing but a pistol and a flashlight, hunting an enemy who knew every twist, every turn, every trap in those suffocating corridors of death. They would be called tunnel rats. The Viet Cong dismissed them at first, laughed at the idea of Americans crawling through their sacred underground fortresses. But within 2 years, Captain Herbert Thornton and a wiry Cuban immigrant named Pedro Rijo Ruiz would be on the Viet Cong's top 10 most wanted list, ranked just below top generals. Within 3 years, these volunteers would eliminate over 12,000 guerrilla fighters and dismantle the entire intelligence apparatus of 2 American divisions. The mathematics of survival were already in motion. The tunnel rats just didn't know it yet. Neither did the Viet Cong. The United States Army arrived in Vietnam in 1965 with the best technology money could buy. Night vision, napalm, B-52 bombers that could level entire grid squares. Westmoreland's strategy was simple. Use overwhelming firepower to force the enemy into conventional battles, drain them of men and material, achieve victory through attrition. There was just one problem. The enemy refused to cooperate. Throughout 1965 and early 1966, American forces conducted search and destroy missions across South Vietnam's 3 Corps tactical zone. They found weapons caches, they encountered sporadic resistance, they counted bodies. But something was wrong. The Viet Cong seemed to materialize from nowhere, strike with devastating effectiveness, then vanish like smoke in the jungle breeze. General William C. Westmoreland would later admit no one has ever demonstrated more ability to hide his installations than the Viet Cong. They were human moles. But in January 1966, the Americans didn't know they were fighting moles. They thought they were fighting guerrillas who melted into the villages and jungle. The truth was far more disturbing. The enemy was beneath them, had been the entire time. On January 7th, 1966, Major General Jonathan O. Seaman, commander of the 1st Infantry Division, prepared to launch the largest search and destroy operation of the Vietnam War to date. Operation Crimp would throw 8,000 American and Australian soldiers at the Hobo Woods in Binh Duong Province, a 12-square-mile area of jungle and marshland believed to contain the headquarters of the Viet Cong's 4th Military Region, the nerve center coordinating all insurgent activities around Saigon. Intelligence suggested 2 full main force battalions operated in the region, the 7th Cu Chi Battalion and the 3rd Quai Thong Battalion, roughly 5,000 men. The plan was textbook: artillery preparation, tactical airstrikes, B-52 arc-light bombing runs, then air mobile insertion from multiple directions to trap the enemy against the Saigon River. Annihilation. The Australians of the 1st Battalion, Royal Australian Regiment, commanded by Lieutenant Colonel Alex Priest, would hold the northern flank. They were battle-hardened troops, respected by their American counterparts, veterans of multiple operations in Warzone D. On the morning of January 8th, hours before the assault, the one divided by RAR's operations officer, Major John Essex Clark, conducted an aerial reconnaissance of their designated landing zone. Something bothered him: the lack of ground cover, the perfect killing field it presented. He recommended changing the landing zone. His superior officers agreed. That decision saved hundreds of Australian lives. When engineers later explored the original landing zone, They discovered it sat directly atop a massive defensive position, one that existed primarily underground. The artillery barrage began right on schedule. Then came the napalm, stripping the jungle canopy. Then the B-52s, their payloads causing considerable damage to enemy defenses. Or so everyone thought. At 9:30 a.m., the helicopters came in. The Australians landed at Landing Zone March, 2 miles south and west of the American forces. They immediately encountered a nightmare. The entire area was seeded with booby traps, tripwires attached to artillery shells, grenades rigged in the undergrowth and hanging from tree branches, punji stake pits hidden beneath innocent-looking ground cover. Major Ian Fisher's D Company, 12th Platoon, approached what was supposed to be a clearing. Enemy fire erupted from a nearby tree line. 6 men were wounded, including Lieutenant James Bork. 2 medics attempting to treat the wounded were killed. Then things got strange. The enemy appeared from behind trees, from ditches, and from holes in the ground that seemed to appear and disappear at will. They would fire, then drop into the earth as if swallowed by it. Vanished. Gone. Colonel Priest came to a terrifying realization. The Australians weren't fighting on top of the enemy position. They were fighting inside it. That night, January 8th through 9th, sentries along C Company's perimeter detected movement. A squad of Viet Cong was infiltrating their position. Machine gunners held fire, thinking it might be a friendly patrol. When they finally opened up, they killed 1 infiltrator. The others fled straight down into the earth. Throughout the night, the pattern repeated. Enemy soldiers would appear, engage, then vanish underground. They were using the tunnels for rapid movement and concealment. More than that, they were living in them. The Australians were surrounded by an enemy that existed in a dimension American military doctrine had never seriously considered. The ground itself had become the enemy. The tunnels the Americans and Australians stumbled upon in January 1966 were not hastily constructed fighting positions. They were architectural masterpieces of guerrilla warfare, engineered over 2 decades of continuous conflict. The Viet Cong, or more accurately, the National Liberation Front fighters and their predecessors, had begun digging these tunnels in the late 1940s while fighting the French. Young volunteers excavated during monsoon season when the soil was soft and pliable. The earth in this region contained clay and iron, creating a cement-like binding agent. As the soil dried, the tunnels remained stable, without supports, able to withstand direct hits from 750-pound bombs dropped as close as 50 yards away. By 1966, the Cu Chi Tunnel complex alone extended over 150 miles, from the outskirts of Saigon all the way to the Cambodian border. But Cu Chi was just one network among many. Hundreds of miles of subterranean passages honeycombed South Vietnam. The tunnels typically measured 2 feet high by 3 feet wide, dimensioned for the smaller Vietnamese physique, deliberately designed to disadvantage larger American soldiers. But calling them tunnels understates their sophistication. These were underground cities. American intelligence reports documented the contents. Living quarters, kitchens, ordnance, factories, hospitals, bomb shelters, command and control nodes, communication centers. Some even contained theaters and music halls. The Cu Chi system could house 5,000 people, some of whom lived underground for 6 months at a time, venturing above only at night. One American soldier, upon first seeing the scope of the tunnels, said they were like the New York subway. But unlike the New York subway, these passages were filled with traps. Viet Cong engineers had created a subterranean gauntlet specifically designed to kill anyone foolish enough to enter. Grenades rigged to tripwires, poison gas chambers, punji stake pits, tethered venomous snakes positioned at head height in the darkness. The tunnels zigzagged at various angles, with multiple levels connected by vertical shafts, designed both to dissipate shockwaves from explosions and to create perfect ambush points where an enemy could appear from any direction. And in January 1966, the American army had absolutely no idea how to fight in them. The initial American approach to tunnel warfare can be generously described as inadequate and more accurately characterized as catastrophic. Standard procedure in early 1966 was simple. Find the tunnel entrance, throw in some grenades, maybe pumping tear gas or smoke, then seal it up and move on. This worked fine for shallow, simple tunnels, the kind used as temporary fighting positions or refuges. It was utterly useless against the deep, complex networks. Bombing? Ineffective. B-52s dropped 750-pound bombs that created impressive explosions and destroyed everything above ground. 50 yards from a tunnel entrance, the occupants barely noticed. The clay iron soil absorbed and dissipated the shockwaves. Chemical warfare? Marginally better, but still insufficient. Soldiers would pump tear gas or smoke into an entrance, expecting it to flood the system. The Viet Cong had built airlocks, trapdoors, and ventilation systems that compartmentalized sections. Smoke entered one chamber, guerrillas simply closed the door and continued operations 3 chambers away. Dogs? Don't ask. Military working dogs couldn't navigate the tight spaces, couldn't avoid booby traps, and frequently panicked in the confined darkness. So commanders did what seemed logical: sending soldiers. This worked about as well as you'd expect when sending men with no training, no specialized equipment, and no understanding of tunnel warfare into a 3-dimensional maze of death constructed by experts who'd been perfecting the art for 20 years. The smallest soldier in an infantry squad would be volunteered to check out a hole. Sometimes they'd crawl 15 feet and declare it clear. Sometimes they'd never come back. Sometimes they'd come back screaming, covered in blood, babbling about the darkness. Casualties among these untrained tunnel explorers came primarily from accidents rather than enemy action men getting lost, suffocating, triggering traps, or simply dying from panic attacks in the claustrophobic darkness. The army needed specialists, volunteers, men with a special kind of courage that went beyond facing an enemy you could see, men willing to crawl into the earth with nothing but a pistol and faith, hunting other men in their own underground fortress. The army needed tunnel rats. They just didn't know it yet. Captain Herbert Thornton had a problem. A chemical corps officer with the 1st Infantry Division. Thornton's job in 1966 was to contaminate Viet Cong tunnels with chemical agents, riot control compounds, tear gas powder, anything that would render the underground networks unlivable. But before you could effectively contaminate a tunnel, you needed to understand it, map it, explore it, and that required sending men into the darkness. Thornton created the first specialized tunnel teams in 1966. He didn't use the word rat initially. That came later, a nickname the men gave themselves with a mixture of dark humor and pride. Thornton just called them volunteers. Finding the right man proved challenging. Physical requirements were strict. Most tunnel rats stood less than 5 feet 5 inches tall, with slight, wiry builds. The average Viet Cong tunnel measured 2 feet by 3 feet. A muscular 6-footer wouldn't fit, period. Even if he could squeeze in, he'd be stuck, helpless, a stationary target in the dark. But physical size was just the entry requirement. The job demanded something far rarer, a specific psychological profile that bordered on the incomprehensible. Tunnel warfare violated every human instinct. Humans are not evolved to crawl through pitch-black spaces barely wider than their shoulders, knowing that death might wait around the next corner in the form of a knife, a bullet, a snake, or simply a cave-in that would bury them alive. The tunnels amplified every fear: claustrophobia, darkness, snakes, spiders, scorpions, the unknown. And behind all those fears lurked the knowledge that if something happened down there, rescue might be impossible. As Thornton explained, a tunnel rat had to have an inquisitive mind, a lot of guts, and a lot of real moxie in knowing what to touch and what not to touch to stay alive, because you could blow yourself out of there in a heartbeat. Harold Roper, an early tunnel rat, remembered, "I felt more fear that I've ever come close to feeling before or since, and yet men volunteered. More than that, some became obsessed with the work." Staff Sergeant Pedro Rayo Ruiz stood 5 feet 4 inches and weighed 130 pounds soaking wet. He had the build of a long-distance runner and the temperament of a wolverine. His fellow tunnel rats called him the human probe. Rijo Ruiz's story embodied everything strange and compelling about the tunnel rats. Born in Cuba, he'd spent his teenage years harassing Fidel Castro's communist troops with guerrilla attacks. When his family fled to the United States, he immediately joined the army, viewing the Vietnam War as a continuation of his personal crusade against communism. He'd been serving as a mine detector with the 1st Infantry Division, one of the most dangerous jobs in Vietnam. When he heard about Thornton's tunnel teams, he volunteered immediately. While other tunnel rats approached the work with grim determination, Rigel Ruiz seemed to revel in it. He became obsessed with tunnel warfare theory, studying every capture diagram, interrogating every prisoner about tunnel construction and tactics. He went down tunnels that were known to contain enemy soldiers, especially when another rat had been wounded during clearance. His methodology was simple: crawl in, find the enemy, kill them, or drive them out, then continue exploring. If a tunnel proved too dangerous or complex, he'd plant explosives and bring the entire structure down on itself. Rigel Ruiz's bravery bordered on suicidal. In one documented incident, 2 tunnel rats had been wounded by enemy fire while clearing a complex. Viet Cong soldiers had retreated deep into the system and were refusing to leave. Rigel Ruiz grabbed a cratering charge, a massive explosive designed to collapse tunnel entrances, and crawled through choking clouds of tear gas that had been pumped into the tunnel. He found the Viet Cong position, placed a charge, and crawled back out just before it detonated, collapsing that entire section of the network and entombing the guerrillas inside. During his service as a tunnel rat, Rigel Ruiz was wounded multiple times. Each time, after recovering, he immediately returned to the tunnels. He became a naturalized American citizen while recuperating from combat injuries in 1968. His first act, after taking the oath, volunteering for another tunnel rat assignment, the Viet Cong knew his name. More importantly, they feared it. Sergeant Robert Batten earned the nickname Batman for reasons lost to history. Some say it was his preference for working at night. Others claim it referenced his ability to navigate the darkness without lights. What's certain is that Batten, like Rigel Ruiz, volunteered to serve 2 additional tours exclusively as a tunnel rat. By 1968, Batten and Captain Thornton had achieved a dubious distinction. They were on the Viet Cong's top 10 most wanted list, ranked just below top generals. Think about that for a moment. 2 Americans, not generals, not bomber pilots, not artillery commanders, but 2 men who crawled through tunnels with pistols became such effective threats that an entire insurgent organization prioritized their elimination above almost all other targets. The Viet Cong didn't create such lists lightly. These rankings represented operational priorities based on the damage individuals inflicted on their military capacity. Batten and Thornton weren't wanted because they'd killed hundreds of enemy soldiers in conventional combat. They were wanted because they'd systematically dismantled the Viet Cong's greatest strategic advantage, the tunnels. Every tunnel Thornton's rats explored was one the Viet Cong couldn't safely use. Every cache of weapons discovered was one less attack on American positions. Every captured document revealed another cell of insurgents. Every prisoner provided more intelligence about the underground networks. And Batten? He kept volunteering to go back down. The tunnel rats learned through trial and error. And in tunnel warfare, errors were fatal. Early tunnel rats entered with their standard issue gear: helmet, load-bearing equipment, canteen, rifle. They learned quickly that bulk was death. Helmets scraped tunnel ceilings, alerting enemies to your position. Load-bearing equipment snagged on obstacles. Canteens sloshed. Rifles were too long to maneuver in 2-foot passages. Soldiers began stripping down. Some abandoned their uniform coats. Most ditched the helmet and equipment. They crawled into the earth wearing just pants and boots, carrying the minimum necessary for survival. Initial tunnel rats used their standard M16 rifles. The weapon was useless too long, too awkward in confined spaces. They switched to the M1911 45 caliber pistol, the Army's standard sidearm. That didn't work either. The 45 round was devastatingly effective at close range, but catastrophically loud in enclosed spaces. A single shot in a tunnel produced a muzzle flash so bright it destroyed the shooter's night vision for critical seconds. The sound was deafening. Literally, tunnel rats firing 45s underground often suffered permanent hearing damage. And those seconds of blindness and deafness in a tunnel, facing an enemy who knew exactly where you were, fatal. Some tunnel rats adopted silencers. Others experimented with smaller caliber revolvers that produced less flash and noise. Some carried sawed-off shotguns. There was no standard answer because every tunnel was different, every situation unique. Gradually, a common preference emerged: the knife. A knife never jammed, never ran out of ammunition, made no sound, produced no flash. And at the distances tunnel combat occurred, sometimes arm's length. Often closer, a knife was as effective as any firearm. Tunnel rats became proficient with their bayonets, using them to probe for booby traps, dispatch snakes, disarm tripwires, and when necessary, kill silently in the dark. But equipment was just the beginning of their education. The real learning came in understanding the tunnels themselves. Sergeant Ronald Payne of the 25th Infantry Division crawled through a tunnel during Operation Cedar Falls on January 24, 1967. A photographer captured the moment: Payne on his stomach, flashlight in his right hand, M1911 pistol in his left, faced a mask of concentration as he navigated a passage barely wider than his shoulders. The photo became famous, appearing in newspapers and magazines. But it also became a teaching tool for later tunnel rats because it showed what not to do. Payne's flashlight had no rat lens, the standard white beam. Within a year, almost no experienced tunnel rat used white light. Why? Because the Viet Cong used white lights and candles. A white light approaching the tunnel was ambiguous, friendly, or enemy? That split second of hesitation could be fatal. Tunnel rats adopted red lens flashlights. Red light was less bright, harder to see from a distance, and unmistakably American. If you saw red light in the tunnel, it was a tunnel rat. If you saw white light, it was the enemy. Shoot. They learned to move differently. Early tunnel rats crawled as quietly as possible, trying to maintain stealth. Experienced rats learned that absolute silence was impossible. The Viet Cong would hear you eventually. Instead, they moved in short bursts, pausing frequently to listen, using the tunnel's acoustics to detect movement ahead. They learned to trust their sense of smell. Tunnel rats who smoked, drank heavily, or ate strongly flavored foods dulled their olfactory sensitivity. The best rats abstained from these common soldier vices because smell provided crucial intelligence. Body odor indicated enemy presence. Gunpowder suggested recent combat. Cooking food meant an occupied chamber nearby. Certain chemical scents warned of gas traps. They learned to never fire more than 3 shots before reloading. Viet Cong soldiers underground would count shots, listening for that pause when an American changed magazines. That's when they rush, closing the distance before you could get your weapon back into action. 3 shots, reload, always have rounds in the chamber. They learn about communication. A communications wire trailing behind you to the surface meant your partner could track your position and you could report findings. But it also made noise dragging behind you. And if you needed to retreat quickly, you might trip on your own wire. Some rats used it, some didn't. Personal preference, calculated risk. They learn about angles and geometry. Viet Cong engineers built tunnels in zigzag patterns with chambers connecting at oblique angles. This design dissipated explosive shock waves and created perfect ambush points. A tunnel rat would crawl around the corner and be face to face with an enemy at touching distance, with no room to maneuver and no time to think. The rat who hesitated died. The rat who fired first survived. They learned that the darkness had gradations. Pure darkness, where your flashlight was your only sense. Dim light filtering from a ventilation shaft or the surface, barely perceptible but enough to create shadows. Candlelight from an occupied chamber, flickering yellow, hypnotic, dangerous. Each type of darkness required different tactics, and they learned about the vertical dimension. Some tunnel complexes had 3 levels, connected by shaft-like passages barely wider than a human body. Transitioning between levels was among the most dangerous moments in tunnel operations. You had to go through the whole blind. Unable to check for traps or enemies on the other side, you just had to go fast. By 1969, experienced tunnel rats had developed a standardized entry procedure. Roll a fragmentation grenade into the entrance first, or blow the entrance open with explosives. This eliminated booby traps on the door and ensured you could enter unopposed. Yes, it alerted everyone underground to your presence. But many rats prefer dealing with an enemy who knew you were coming over, one who could shoot you the moment you stuck your head through the entrance. Remember Sergeant Stewart Green, the man who sat on a nail? His story deserves a full telling, because it exemplifies both the horror and absurdity of tunnel warfare. After discovering the trapdoor with his posterior, Green volunteered to explore the tunnel. He assembled a squad all small men, all volunteers, and they equipped themselves with flashlights, pistols, and a field telephone with a wire connection to the surface. They crawled in. The tunnel stretched on and on. The field telephone wire unspooled behind them 50 feet, 100 feet, 200 feet. They traveled nearly a mile underground, navigating chambers, side passages, and connecting tunnels. The complex was enormous, far larger than anything American intelligence had predicted. Then they found the dispensary. It was a fully equipped underground medical facility. Surgical instruments, medicines, bandages, beds, and 30 Viet Cong soldiers. The firefight that followed was described by survivors as truly hellish. In the confined space, muzzle flashes created strobing light effects. The sound was overwhelming. Smoke filled the passages. Some Viet Cong fled through escape hatches. Others returned fire, the bullets ricocheting off clay walls in the dark. Green Squad donned gas masks and hurled tear gas grenades toward the enemy positions. Then they began fighting their way back toward the entrance, dragging their wounded, firing behind them at pursuing enemies, following the telephone wire through the smoke and darkness. At one point, Green realized a wounded comrade was falling behind. He crawled back through choking tear gas. Remember, he was wearing a gas mask, which restricted vision and made breathing difficult, grabbed his fellow soldier and pulled him toward the surface. Both men emerged gasping and covered in mud. When Green reported his findings to his superiors, they decided to use a smoke machine to pump smoke into the tunnel system. The plan worked better than expected. As smoke pressure increased, it found multiple exit points revealing tunnel entrances, connecting passages, and bunkers that had remained undetected on the surface. American officers were stunned. The tunnel network was exponentially larger than they'd imagined. The implications were terrifying. If this was under a random patch of jungle in the Hobo Woods, how many such networks existed across South Vietnam? Not every tunnel rat story ended with a hero emerging triumphant and covered in mud. On the afternoon of January 12, 1966, 3 days into Operation Crimp, an Australian engineer entered a tunnel in the Cu Chi complex. He encountered a trapdoor between two underground rooms. He attempted to pass through. The door was designed to allow passage in only one direction, or perhaps he was slightly too large for the opening, or perhaps he just got stuck. The exact mechanism doesn't matter. What matters is that he became wedged, unable to go forward, unable to back out, unable to be pulled free by his comrades. They tried, for hours. Other Australian tunnel rats descended and attempted to extract him. Nothing worked. He was stuck fast. The tunnel had been contaminated with tear gas and carbon monoxide. In his struggle to free himself, the engineer removed his respirator, hoping to get just a bit more room to maneuver. He suffocated to death while his comrades worked frantically above and below him, unable to help, forced to listen to his struggles growing weaker. The Australian tunnel rats eventually had to abandon his body in the tunnel. They couldn't extract him. They couldn't even bury him properly. They sealed that section of the tunnel with explosives, collapsing it to serve as his tomb. The incident left a pall of grief over Operation Crimp and forced a tactical change. Australian commanders, after losing a man to a tunnel trap rather than enemy action, ordered their teams to take fewer risks. Whenever possible, instead of exploring and mapping tunnel networks, the new policy was simple: blow them up and seal the enemy inside. This was the reality of tunnel rat operations. According to American records, only about 100 soldiers served as tunnel rats throughout the entire Vietnam War. Most were either killed in the tunnels or in ambushes on the surface. Some were wounded multiple times and kept volunteering for more assignments. The casualty rate was staggering, and yet there was never a shortage of volunteers. A special culture developed among the tunnel rats. They called themselves rats with pride, embracing the nickname that implied they were somehow less than regular soldiers. In truth, they considered themselves and were considered by others as elite. They had one ironclad rule: no rat, wounded or dead, was ever left inside a tunnel. Ever. When Rizhou Ruiz crawled through tear gas to plan the cratering charge after 2 rats had been wounded, he wasn't following orders. He was following the code. When another tunnel rat team used 300 pounds of C4 explosive to blow the top off a tunnel system where one of their number had been injured, they weren't being vindictive. They were sending a message. You hurt one of us, we'll bury you and your entire complex. The tunnel rats developed their own recognition protocols. When emerging from a tunnel, a rat would whistle an agreed upon tune. This prevented surface security from mistaking a muddy figure crawling from the earth for a Viet Cong guerrilla and shooting him. The specific tunes varied by unit and operation, but the principle remained constant. They developed their own training methods. Experienced rats would take new volunteers down into clear sections of tunnels, teaching them how to move, how to listen, how to probe for traps. These training missions were still dangerous. Not all clear tunnels remained clear. But veterans understood that a tunnel rat who learned on the job without preparation was a dead tunnel rat. They shared intelligence obsessively. Every tunnel explored was sketched, every trap documented, every Viet Cong technique analyzed. What worked in one tunnel might work in another. What killed a rat in Cu Chi might save a rat in the Iron Triangle. And they accepted the arithmetic of their profession with a fatalism that bordered on the philosophical. Harold Roper, reflecting years later on his time as a tunnel rat, summed it up perfectly. I felt more fear than I've ever come close to feeling before or since. But he kept going down. By 1968, something remarkable had happened. The hunters had become the hunted. Viet Cong commanders who had spent years developing the tunnel systems as impregnable sanctuaries were now issuing orders to avoid staying underground during American operations. Documents captured by tunnel rats revealed a shift in Viet Cong doctrine. Tunnels were to be used for transit and concealment, but not for sustained operations, when American tunnel teams were known to be in the area. One captured Viet Cong officer, interviewed after the war, estimated that tunnel rats had eliminated over 12,000 guerrilla fighters. More importantly, they'd captured tens of thousands of weapons, millions of rounds of ammunition, and the crown jewels of any military operation: intelligence. In August 1968, a single tunnel rat operation killed 3 Viet Cong soldiers and captured 153 more. 153 prisoners from one tunnel complex. These weren't civilians caught in a sweep. These were armed guerrillas living underground who chose to surrender rather than face the tunnel rats in their own domain. Let that sink in. The Viet Cong had built these tunnels over 20 years specifically to be impregnable underground fortresses, where they held every advantage. Within 2 years, they were surrendering by the hundreds rather than fighting American tunnel rats inside them. The true dominance of the tunnel rats wasn't measured in body counts. It was measured in what they found. During one operation, tunnel rats discovered 6,000 pounds of rice and 40 pounds of salt in a 120-foot-long tunnel. Doesn't sound impressive until you understand logistics. That amount of rice could feed a Viet Cong battalion for months. Finding it meant that battalion would starve or be forced to surface and expose themselves to air power while searching for replacement supplies. Another underground complex covered 2,000 meters and yielded cameras, film, printing presses, and typesetting equipment, in addition to weapons and ammunition. The Viet Cong were running an underground propaganda center, producing leaflets and documents to support the insurgency. The tunnel rats shut it down. One rat stumbled across a missing M48 tank. The Viet Cong had somehow captured or salvaged the 30-ton vehicle and dragged it underground to use as a command center. Other tunnel rats routinely uncovered hidden artillery pieces and mortars that the Viet Cong had secreted in underground chambers for future attacks. But the most significant find came in 1970. A tunnel rat team operating in the Cu Chi area discovered a major signals intelligence facility underground. The Viet Cong had established a sophisticated code-breaking operation that was intercepting, decoding, and translating every radio transmission from the 1st and 25th Infantry Divisions. Every single transmission. For months, possibly years, the Viet Cong had been reading American operational plans in real time, allowing them to set up ambushes, avoid sweeps, and position forces with perfect foreknowledge of American movements. The sudden loss of this intelligence immediately made both divisions more effective and dramatically safer from deliberate ambushes. American casualties dropped. Successful operations increased. All because one tunnel rat crawled into the darkness and found the radio room. The intelligence hauls included more than just equipment. Tunnel rats regularly discovered lists of Viet Cong spies and sympathizers operating in South Vietnamese government positions. They found maps showing planned attack routes. They recovered orders revealing enemy strategies. They captured battle plans that allowed American commanders to pre-position forces and ambush the ambushers. Every captured document represented lives saved. Every map discovered was a future attack prevented. Every weapons cache found was an assault that would never happen. As tunnel rats refined their craft, they didn't just explore tunnels, they destroyed them. Or, more accurately, they denied their use to the enemy for extended periods. Early attempts at tunnel destruction were crude. Soldiers would pack the entrance with conventional explosives and detonate, hoping to collapse the entire system. This rarely worked. The same clay iron construction that made tunnels resistant to bombing also made them resistant to demolition charges. The tunnel rats developed more sophisticated methods. For shallow tunnels, they used a mixture of acetylene gas and oxygen, filling the tunnel system and then igniting it with small charges. The resulting explosion would collapse the structure from the inside out. But this method was slow, required extensive equipment, and only worked in areas where American forces had time and security to set it up. For deeper, more complex networks, the rats employed a different approach: chemical denial. They would fill the tunnels with powdered tear gas, specifically CS riot control agent, and then collapse the entrances with explosives. The tear gas permeated the clay walls and made the tunnels unlivable for 2 to 6 months. 2 to 6 months. That's how long it took for the chemical agent to dissipate enough for the tunnels to be reoccupied. For the Viet Cong, this was devastating. A tunnel system that had taken years to construct will be rendered useless for half a year from a single tunnel rat operation. And the tunnel rats were conducting dozens of such operations monthly. By 1969 through 1970, the US Air Force had joined the anti-tunnel campaign with a new weapon: delayed fuse bombs dropped from B-52s. These munitions would penetrate deep into the earth before exploding, creating massive underground craters that destroyed tunnel systems from below. The delayed fuses meant the bombs would burrow through multiple levels before detonation, maximizing damage to complex networks. The Cu Chi tunnel system, 150 miles of interconnected passages that had taken 20 years to construct, was finally rendered largely unusable by 1970, not through a single massive assault, but through the cumulative efforts of tunnel rats systematically exploring, mapping, and destroying it section by section. By 1969, the psychological impact of tunnel rat operations had become measurable through captured enemy documents and prisoner interrogations. One Viet Cong training manual, recovered from a tunnel complex, included an entire section on tunnel defense against American teams. The manual acknowledged that traditional tunnel defense tactics, waiting in ambush, using booby traps, employing poison gas, were increasingly ineffective against specialized American tunnel teams. The manual recommended new tactics: abandon tunnels entirely when American tunnel rat operations were detected in the area, collapse sections behind retreating forces to slow pursuit, and prioritize killing tunnel rats above all other tactical objectives. Think about that last point. The Viet Cong military doctrine evolved to identify tunnel rats as priority targets, worth more than standard infantry, worth more than officers, worth more than support personnel. Only helicopter pilots and long-range reconnaissance teams were considered equally valuable targets. A former Viet Cong officer, interviewed after the war, admitted that the loss of the tunnel systems to American tunnel rat operations was a significant strategic defeat that undermined the Viet Cong's ability to operate around Saigon. He estimated that the combination of tunnel rat operations and B-52 arc-light strikes against known tunnel complexes had forced the Viet Cong to abandon roughly 60% of their underground infrastructure by 1970. 60%. Of an underground network that had taken 2 decades to build, the Viet Cong had initially dismissed the tunnel rats. These Americans crawling around in the dark, getting lost, triggering traps, occasionally shooting each other in the confusion. They were more hindrance to themselves than threat to the insurgency. But that dismissal transformed into concern, then alarm, then fear as Captain Thornton's teams evolved into increasingly effective underground hunters. By 1968, when Thornton and Batten appeared on the Viet Cong's most wanted list, the transformation was complete. The Tunnel Rats had become the most feared American unit operating in South Vietnam among Viet Cong commanders, not paratroopers, not tank crews, not helicopter gunships, not B-52 bombers. Small men with pistols, crawling in the dark. The statistics tell the story of the transformation. At the start of Operation Crimp in January 1966, American forces were stunned to discover a tunnel complex beneath their positions. They were unprepared, ill-equipped, and suffered casualties from simply trying to explore the entrances. The operation ended after 6 days, with the Americans withdrawing, having failed to fully clear or destroy the tunnel network. By 1968, tunnel rat operations had become routine. Teams would be helicoptered from one tunnel complex to another, conducting multiple explorations in a single day. What took days in 1966 took hours in 1968. The evolution of equipment tells part of the story. Early tunnel rats went in with whatever gear they had. By 1968, specialized tunnel exploration kits were standard issue. Red lens flashlights, communications wire, compasses, bayonets for trap detection, gas masks, and usually a .38 caliber revolver or silenced pistol chosen for reduced flash and noise. The evolution of tactics tells the rest. In 1966, tunnel rats crawled in blind, hoping for the best. By 1968, they had developed detailed procedures: grenade or explosive entry, systematic chamber-by-chamber clearance, communication protocols, extraction procedures, denial methods. They'd invented an entirely new military specialty from scratch: in combat, under fire, in the dark. The captured weapons statistics are staggering. Most Viet Cong weapons and equipment seized during American operations were found by tunnel rats, not by regular infantry doing sweeps, not by intelligence-driven raids. Tunnel rats crawling underground, chamber by chamber, documenting everything, calling in helicopters to extract the material. The prisoner statistics are equally impressive. Tunnel rats captured thousands of Viet Cong soldiers who'd believed themselves safe underground. These prisoners provided intelligence that led to more tunnel discoveries, more captures, more weapons seizures, a cascade effect that accelerated with each operation. But perhaps the most significant statistic is the one that's hardest to quantify: attacks prevented. Every tunnel complex denied to the Viet Cong was a staging area they couldn't use. Every cache of weapons found was an assault that wouldn't happen. Every intelligence document captured was an ambush avoided. American casualties decreased in areas where tunnel rat operations were most intensive. Viet Cong effectiveness diminished. The correlation wasn't perfect. The Vietnam War was far too complex for single-cause explanations, but it was noticeable, measurable, and documented in after-action reports. Operation Cedar Falls, launched in January 1967, exactly 1 year after Operation Crimp, demonstrated how thoroughly tunnel rat tactics had evolved. The operation targeted the Iron Triangle, a Viet Cong stronghold near Saigon known to contain extensive tunnel networks. Unlike Crimp, where the discovery of tunnels was a surprise, Cedar Falls was planned from the start as an anti-tunnel operation. Tunnel rat teams were integrated into the operation from day one. Engineers accompanied infantry sweeps specifically to locate tunnel entrances. Once found, tunnel rats immediately entered and began systematic exploration and clearance. The operation uncovered massive underground complexes, some with chambers large enough to hold 50 people, others with intricate ventilation systems that kept the air breathable 3 levels down. One complex had a functioning kitchen, complete with cookware, utensils, and a chimney system that dispersed smoke to prevent detection from the surface. The tunnel rats explored them all, methodically, professionally, and they did it while under constant threat. Cedar Falls saw active combat above ground throughout the operation, meaning the tunnels might contain retreating enemy forces at any moment. The results spoke for themselves. Thousands of weapons captured, tons of rice and supplies seized, dozens of prisoners taken, and kilometers of tunnels either destroyed or denied through chemical contamination. But more significantly, Cedar Falls represented a paradigm shift. In 1966, the tunnels had been a surprise that stymied American forces. In 1967, they were an expected element of the battlefield, one that American forces had developed specialized capabilities to counter. The Viet Cong's greatest strategic advantage had been neutralized in 12 months. The 1968 Tet Offensive was the Viet Cong's strategic high watermark. Guerrilla forces launched coordinated attacks across South Vietnam, including a dramatic assault on the U.S. Embassy in Saigon. The attacks shocked America and changed public perception of the war. But Tet was also a disaster for the Viet Cong. They committed their forces to open combat and suffered catastrophic casualties. Some estimates suggest the Viet Cong lost 50,000 fighters during the Tet Offensive and subsequent American counterattacks. They never fully recovered. And one reason they couldn't recover was that their logistics infrastructure, the tunnel systems, had been systematically compromised by tunnel rat operations over the preceding 2 years. Tunnels that would have been safe staging areas for post-Tet reorganization had been destroyed or contaminated. Weapons caches that would have rearmed depleted units had been found and seized. Documents that would have identified new recruits and sympathizers had been captured and exploited. The Viet Cong tried to use the Cu Chi tunnels to support attacks on Saigon during Tet. Tunnel rats had so thoroughly explored and mapped those complexes that American forces knew exactly where the exits were. They positioned machine gun teams at the exits and waited. Viet Cong fighters emerging from the tunnels walked into ambushes. In one documented incident, a Viet Cong unit of approximately 200 fighters attempted to use a tunnel system to infiltrate closer to their target in Saigon. American tunnel rats had explored that system months earlier and left markers showing the main passages. When intelligence indicated the Viet Cong were in the tunnels, American forces simply pumped CS gas into every entrance simultaneously and waited. The Viet Cong, already weakened and demoralized from the failing offensive, surrendered in mass rather than suffocate underground. The tunnel rats had turned the Viet Cong's greatest advantage into a trap. As American forces began withdrawing from Vietnam in the early 1970s, tunnel rat operations decreased. The mission was largely complete. The major tunnel complexes had been explored, mapped, and denied. Some remained functional, but they were shadows of the elaborate networks that had existed in 1966. In the final counting, tunnel rats, never more than 100 men serving at any given time across the entire country, had systematically dismantled an underground infrastructure that had taken the Viet Cong 20 years and millions of man-hours to construct. They did it one tunnel at a time, one chamber at a time, one crawl through the darkness at a time. Staff Sergeant Pedro Rijo Ruiz survived the war. He was one of the few tunnel rats to serve multiple tours and survive. In interviews after the war, he downplayed his heroism, saying he was just doing my job. His service record told a different story. Multiple Purple Hearts, a Silver Star, Bronze Stars, and commendations from grateful infantry units whose lives were saved by intelligence his tunnel operations had uncovered. Sergeant Robert Batman Batten also survived, though he rarely spoke about his time in the tunnels. He attended tunnel rat reunions in later years, part of a tight-knit brotherhood of men who shared an experience so intense, so uniquely terrifying, that only other tunnel rats could truly understand. Captain Herbert Thornton, the man who created the first specialized tunnel rat teams in 1966, went on to a distinguished military career, but he always maintained that his greatest contribution to the Army was developing the tactics and training that turned ordinary soldiers into the world's first specialized tunnel warfare fighters. The Australian tunnel rats, particularly Captain Alexander Hugh Sandy McGregor, pioneered many of the techniques that American tunnel rats later adopted. McGregor received the Military Cross for his courage and leadership during Operation Crimp. He wrote extensively about tunnel warfare after the war, preserving the institutional knowledge that might otherwise have been lost. Today, at the National Museum of the U.S. Army, there's an exhibit on the tunnel rats of Vietnam. The centerpiece is a recreated tunnel entrance 2 feet high, 3 feet wide, disappearing into darkness. Visitors are invited to crawl a few feet into the tunnel. It's clean, well lit, and safe. There are no booby traps, no snakes, no enemy soldiers waiting in ambush. You can back out anytime you want. Most visitors manage only a few feet before claustrophobia forces them out. Now imagine crawling not feet, but hundreds of feet, in complete darkness except for flashlight, with poisonous snakes, with tripwired grenades, with enemy soldiers who know you're coming and are waiting in chambers specifically designed to ambush you. Imagine doing this for hours, day after day, operation after operation. That's what the tunnel rats did. The exhibit includes photos of tunnel rats in action. Mud-covered men with 1,000-yard stares, holding pistols and flashlights, standing next to tunnel entrances barely large enough for a medium-sized dog. There are artifacts bayonets used to probe for traps, red-lensed flashlights, communications wire, gas masks, and there's a quote from Harold Roper displayed prominently. I felt more fear than I've ever come close to feeling before or since. And yet, they went down. In January 1966, during Operation Crimp, the Australian and American forces stumbled onto the Cu Chi tunnel complex. They were shocked, unprepared, and outmaneuvered by an enemy fighting from underground. The tunnel seemed like an unsolvable problem. How do you fight an enemy you can't see in an environment where all your advantages disappear? The Viet Cong thought the tunnels made them invincible. 20 years of construction, hundreds of miles of passages, an underground nation that could withstand anything the Americans could throw at it. They were wrong. By 1970, the Cu Chi tunnels were destroyed, the Iron Triangle tunnels were destroyed, the elaborate underground networks that had taken 2 decades to construct had been systematically explored, exploited, and denied. The Viet Cong's greatest strategic advantage had become a liability, a place where small American teams haunted them with impunity. And it happened because roughly 100 soldiers men who stood less than 5.5 feet tall, who had courage beyond comprehension, who crawled into darkness armed with nothing but a pistol, and determination volunteered to face their deepest fears for one simple reason. Somebody had to go down. They were dismissed at first, mocked by some, misunderstood by many. The army didn't even have an official designation for tunnel rats. It was just a nickname, a crude label for soldiers doing necessary but unglamorous work. Within 2 years, the Viet Cong feared them more than any other American unit. Within 3 years, tunnel rat operations had dismantled the entire underground infrastructure of the insurgency. The transformation was complete. The dismissed had become the dominant. The rats had become the rulers of the underground world. And in that darkness, crawling through clay corridors barely wider than their shoulders, these small men cast the longest shadows. Sergeant Stuart Green, the man who accidentally discovered a tunnel entrance by sitting on it, survived the war. In an interview decades later, he was asked if he'd been afraid during his mile-long crawl through the darkness. Ending in a firefight with 30 Viet Cong soldiers in an underground dispensary, he laughed. Afraid? Son, I was terrified. We all were, every time. But somebody had to go down. And so they did, into the earth, into the darkness, into history.